All right, everybody, we are back again with another episode of the Coaches Conferences. It's season number 3. Don't know what episode we're on. We just continue to record, continue to bring on cool guests from all across the world. Now, remember, hit that like, subscribe, comment button down below so we continue to have this thing grow and continue to bring on cool guests from all over the world. But another special one with me here today, I got Coach Michael, founder and coach at OVR Performance. They make devices for athletes and coaches that are affordable and simple. VBT and jump system. Coach Michael also has a very interesting former background where he was a filmmaker before OVR, and his most known film is West Side Barbell documentary. Coach, thank you, and welcome to the Coach's Compass.
No problem.
So, yeah. I mean, I feel like we talked about this a little bit off air, but I feel like we need to jump into this. What made you go from filmmaking to coaching? And how has that transition been?
Well, the transition's been awesome. What made it happen was, so I'm in Tallahassee, Florida now. I'm from Tallahassee, Florida, and this podcast has video.
Yeah.
Okay. So, so as you can see, I've got all these FSU jerseys and stuff.
Yeah.
And a shirt that looks, it's gold. So I coach at a school here in town called Florida High, which is a public charter school that's run and overseen by Florida State. So it's a public school, but it's like a project. It's basically the university system administering a public school, I think mostly for like data collection type purposes and to place interns and stuff. I don't really know what, I don't know what they really get out of it, but I guess we enjoy sort of we're like a family member that they
just
may or may not choose.
Yeah.
But like, we're not on their campus. We're miles away off in the woods. So like, it's a weird thing. Our money at some point, school doesn't pay me. I'm completely a volunteer, but our money somewhere, how everyone else gets paid, gets administered through Florida State somehow. So, but all that is to say, I'm a kid from Tallahassee, and like most kids from Tallahassee, I played a lot of sports. Football especially is enormous here. I played with guys like Antonio Cromartie and Ernie Sims, and I played against LeGarrette Blount a few times in high school. So I'm 38 now, but I grew up in a town that's entire culture is football. And so like every other kid, I played football. And just before signing day, I had this kind of like epiphany moment where I was like, I was trying to narrow down schools. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And, there was a point in time where I thought I was going to be a real big recruit. Like, some sites had mentioned my name and they were throwing out, crystal balls essentially. And I was like, they haven't even, contacted me. This will be great. I'm waiting for calls from these big schools and I'm getting letters and stuff, but they don't mean anything. And then the schools that actually were like on my level, I had a hard time reconciling that reality of like where I really was and what I'd been set up to do and, what I wanted to do. But I had this, I'd always been interested in film and I'd been in an art club and stuff. And so I had an epiphany where I woke up and was like, I want to try and go to film school instead of playing football. And I had some opportunities to throw and stuff for track as well. So I was like, I want to, I have this background as an athlete, and not just as an athlete. Like, I had been to West Side Barbell when I was 12 years old. My dad knew Louis Simmons. And so I grew up with conjugate training was my native tongue. I didn't understand how the rest of the world trained. I just knew that we do max effort and dynamic effort day. And, I could talk to you about chart and, Verkhoshansky and stuff as a teenager, just right, because my dad was so into it. So I had this wealth of knowledge, my dad basically, and, again, Dave Tate did seminars in our garage in Tallahassee in the early 2000s. He did 3 Elite FTS seminars in our garage. He thought it was like a gym, like a commercial gym. And my dad was just like, would you come do a seminar in our gym? And Dave Tate was like, sure. And then he shows up and he's like, oh crap, it's a house in the woods and I need to ask more questions.
Yeah.
But people came, and so he ended up doing 3 of them over the course of basically my high school career. But it was a thing that was just so normal to me, reading articles from Powerlifting USA and stuff, just because my dad would talk to me about it and he'd set them out and I made all this progress and stuff. So I knew what I had confidence when it came to doing things like film, because of what I had done in the gym. I'd gone from being, 6 foot, 150-pound freshman who couldn't touch the field. I literally, like, my freshman year, I did not appear in even so much as a JV game. I appeared for 4 plays in a freshman-only scrimmage, and I got in trouble. I realized my coach was not going to put me in, so I literally ran onto the field and was just like, it's going to take him a minute to figure out who's out there that's not supposed to be. And I did well, but they pulled me off and said, like, you're never going back on the field again because you did that. And I was like, that's cool. Our season had actually ended, and it was a makeup game for 9/11. So that's, again, I'm 38, so this is that season. But after that season, I told my dad, like, I'm really competitive, but I didn't have a lot of confidence at the time. But I was like, I know for sure I am not the worst kid at my school. I was like, in fact, I know that I'm a little above average, not anything special, but like my goal was just, I'm going to make them have to play me on JV. And meanwhile, I didn't really like fully understand that my dad was a very good coach and very good trainer. He was a stockbroker during the day, but he went and got his CSCS just on a lark. And we had the first reverse hyper in the state of Florida. We had at one point 2 monoliths in our garage. We had the first belt squat. We had like a fully equipped collegiate or pro level gym just in our garage. So I didn't realize what kind of resource I had. And simultaneously, the quirks of my dad, which I definitely have myself, of sort of like getting really ramped up and emphatically talking about things, like getting really demonstrative in how excited I am. My dad was like that. So like when he would talk to me about training, that's how I got it, was, like any coaching cue he gave me, there was always excitement and passion behind it. So I didn't realize like the wealth of knowledge that he had just sort of built up in me. The way that, like NBA players will say, like, I didn't know my dad was good at basketball until like other kids told me. Sort of a similar thing of like, it wasn't until I got out into the world and saw how other people trained, it was like, why would you do that?
Right.
You're not, you're not, what stimulus are you trying to develop, right? Or what adaptation are you trying to develop? Like, why are you doing that? Why does your rest look like that? Why does your sets and reps look like that? Like, what are you, I'm looking and going like, this is all disjointed. You would do this for this reason, but I don't think that's why you're doing it. And then I started filmmaking. I made actually the biggest project that I've ever been associated with was a diet documentary called Forks Over Knives, which was like, I think is still the most watched documentary in Netflix history. I had no back end on it. I was a 22-year-old. They were like, hey, can you edit this? Sure. Yeah, sure. No one will ever watch this. I was like, I'm not even here to edit. Like, I wanted to be a writer. And over the years, I'm 6'2", 6'3", 250 pounds. I was, approximately kind of this size when I went out to LA. So I was just like hulking giant in a field that, for whatever reason, most people who work in like production and Hollywood and stuff like are usually tiny people. So I was like, this ogre who kind of loomed in the background, and I would always wear a West Side Barbell hoodie, and the logo on the back of the hoodie was the logo for West Side Barbell's Louis Simmons' old dog Nitro, which is a pit bull, and he's like got 350 pounds attached to its collar and stuff, doing like a collar deadlift. And the reverse of the logo was on the back of the shirt. And on the reverse, you see like the backside of the dog, and the dog has massive testicles. So I think they've, cleaned that up a little. I wish they, I think they should always have a version that has that like not safe for work version. But so I would be editing at this computer, and it was a very like hippie type project, Forks Over Knives. It's a vegan diet documentary. So, you got me on it, this big hulking young ogre, and everyone would just see my back because we all sat on like stability balls at one point. My hips were really strong, just sitting there like in a box squat basically for hours.
Did they give you at least a little bit bigger of a stability ball? They gave you the same size as everybody else.
Yeah, they gave me a big one,
Okay.
but then like the desk was small, so then I was like more hunched.
Yeah.
Just I don't like fit. I'm like Shrek or something. Like I don't fit in a natural society is not built for me. So everyone would see, like this sort of, obscene dog on the back of my hoodie every day as they're looking over at me and I'm, just blocking out the whole computer. And they'd ask me stories about like, what is that? I'm like, oh, it's this gym out in Ohio. It's got all these power lifters, and it's kind of crazy little troll man who's in charge of it all, Louis Simmons. And years later, this woman who I worked with, she contacted me because she had gone on through several jobs after the turnover in LA. Like you just rack up projects kind of in the way that you can, if you train with athletes, like you can rack up a ton of athletes and it sounds like you've done a million things. And you're like, yeah, but that guy only came for like 6 weeks. I don't know where he is. He doesn't answer his phone anymore. Like he was just passing through and I happen to be there. It's like running a hotel or something sometimes. And, but LA is sort of like that. So like, if I just told you the things that I've done, it sounds like, oh man, you're like this man of adventure and travel. And it's like, not really. Most days look pretty boring, but, so this woman had gone on several sort of stops later and she was at this big reality TV sort of production house where they were trying to find content that appealed. And this is like 15 years ago. They're trying to find content that appealed to a young male audience, like the 18 to 34-year-old male. That was like the holy grail, because if they can get you then before you've got any money, and they can get you hooked on whatever product it is and create some brand loyalty, so that when you are rich, like you buy the Lexus or you buy the whatever it is, when you go like, who's buying Buicks? It's like dudes who were young in the 70s and are looking at Buicks. No one's seen a Buick commercial since Tiger, but that's what's going on. But so she was like, I kind of mentioned to them that story that you told me about the powerlifting gym. Would you want to do a documentary or do a reality show on it? And it was basically like they would pay me to just sort of like make the acquaintance and facilitate bringing these powerlifters to the table. And I was like, you don't understand. Like these guys, this is like a biker club, basically. This is like the Hells Angels with squat racks. So I was like, they're going to say no. But meanwhile, I know these people. And in that instant, I was like, this tells me two things. Because this woman had no sports background, period. She hadn't played rec league. She was, she's the type of person who, like, we go to a afternoon party or something while everyone's watching a game, and she'd be like, "Yay, sports ball!"
Yeah. Go
Yeah,
team.
yeah, go whichever team we're rooting for, like that type of person. And I love her to death. But like, when she's asking me about this, I was like, well, this tells me two things. Number one, tells me that this story idea has appeal and it translates to a broader demographic, so it's commercially viable. And then number two, she's not saying, hey, I researched this gym based on what you told me. She was like, I want your version. So it was immediately like, I came away from it like, oh my God, I can do this. Like her whole thing is she hears professional storytellers come to her all day long and go, hey, I've got a great idea. Let me tell you. And she says no 90+% of the time. And here she is coming out to me and saying, hey, I halfway sold your idea already. Like, let's get paid. And so it's like, that was validating to me in that moment of like, I can tell a story at a professional level. And this is a professional level story. So I said no to her. And then over the course of several years, kind of went about putting myself in a position to raise the money and go independently produce that. And then it came out. So that was like 2012, 2013 that we had that conversation. I start the movie really in 2014, start shooting in 2015, stopped shooting in 2018, and it hit Netflix in 2019. And then I moved back to Florida because while making that movie, which was again about stuff that I knew when I was young and people that I had met before, like the internet kind of made them kind of famous, these were just like grizzled old dudes that I knew who lifted a lot of weights. Like it was neat. Like it was something that you would tell people about, but mostly because you're like, yeah, you won't believe these characters that I know through my dad. And then it became, over the years that people would be like, you know him? You know them? You've been there? I was like, how do y'all all of a sudden, YouTube and Instagram, it was like all of a sudden people knew about this thing that was just common lore in my household. And while making the movie, I flew to Australia and did some seminars, and I met pro rugby teams out there, and I went out and saw Buddy Morris with the Arizona Cardinals and talked to him, and I talked to Sal Alosi, who was with you at UCLA at the time, and Pete Prinzi, who was with the St. Louis Cardinals. I went out and saw Joey Batson at Clemson and Bill Gillespie while he was still at Liberty, and Louis Simmons was starting to get up there in age, and it was harder and harder to get him on the phone, and this unique thing started happening where coaches started calling me and saying hey, what did you were there for months, right? What did you see? And meanwhile, I knew, I became friends with Dave Hoff and Anthony Oliveira and a lot of the lifters who were up there and stuff. I was really a nerd about their training. So I had just mountains of interviews that really weren't about the story of the gym. They were about training principles. And so it was you think about when you read something on the internet or you watch a video or something, I used the camera in my history as a filmmaker basically as leverage to get that direct access to pretty much anyone that I wanted at the time. And I would not only go out and meet with these people, watch them train athletes. At Westside, I got to stay around for, months on end and go back year after year. Usually I'd stick around there for probably 2 months on average. And you get hundreds of hours of being a fly on the wall and then getting to train sometimes with them, in between. I wouldn't train with the big powerlifting group, but I'd train sometimes with the coaches in between the morning and the night crew. So you're meeting, track coaches from all over the world as they came in, and baseball coaches, and basketball, and NFL players who were coming in and stuff. And I'd get to see all the fine details that basically got left out of all the books. And I'd get to, number one, I'd be taping it, so I get to watch it back. And then I get to actually ask for clarification and stuff while I was doing it. So it was this, I counted up the hours that I did it. And when I make a documentary, the amount of time that I spend on, every moment is basically research, but the amount of time that I actively spend working on it on a single subject, it is the equivalent of getting 4 PhDs in terms of just hours. Because this is, you think about when you go to school for 12, 15 hours a semester. Yeah. You're a student, you're doing student things, you're looking around the class at, who are you going to talk to after, who do you're casually engaged to the curriculum. You're half-assing everything. And you come out of it and go oh, I've got a piece of paper. I know, look at these things that I know. Versus when you make a film and you're self-financing it, I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to lose assets. I'm going to lose all of my savings. I'm going to lose relationships and family. I've got to turn this into money. So your attention is so much higher. It's almost like putting VBT on a barbell. It's I'm doing the same thing, but my intent is now high. Yeah. But I became again, I had this language of training just in the back of my head from my childhood. And now I was now I'm I went to the St. Louis Cardinals facility on opening day and was interviewing their strength coach, who was an FSU alum, in the weight room on opening day as $200 million of roster is squatting behind me and they're about to go play. And I'm I don't really watch baseball. So I was like, I don't know who these people are, but he's like, oh, that guy's worth like 120 million. And that guy's, his
A whole
contract's
bunch
like
of money
80.
right behind you.
Yeah. He's like, there's like $250 million in this room right now. And it's
Yes.
not either of us. And then he's like, do you want to stay and watch the game and, meet all the guys and stuff? And I was like, I can't, because I have to immediately drive to an NFL team to do the same thing with them. And I was just like, I came away from it. I was so much more interested in the training than the process of making movies. So then I moved back to Tallahassee. I've made some money. I feel like weirdly hollow and empty because finishing the documentary didn't actually provide any fulfillment, which is kind of what I was saying before.
Yeah.
Somebody just reached out to me and said, like, would you want to like help train some high schoolers?
Right.
And I said, okay. It was supposed to be a just 2 or 3 day thing. And I was supposed to be there to show the coaches an outline of training. And none of the coaches showed up. So it was just kids. And literally it was just like, they handed these kids off to me and the adults never came in. And so like the second day it happened again. And I was like, there was a moment where I almost walked out. And instead I was like, this is actually better that they're not here because they clearly don't care. But this is a lot of fun I'm getting to do. I started bringing like timing gates and jump devices and stuff. And within a week, I went and told my wife, this is what I want to do. I don't want to make movies anymore. I don't want to make TV. And she's like, great. Are they going to pay you? And I was like, no, it's a public school in Florida. What are they going to pay me? Like $1,000 for a year? Which turns out is like what they offered basically.
Yeah.
My wife was like, well, you can do it, but like, we need money. And I was like, all right. And so then I had this crazy idea. And again, I just raised money for a powerlifting documentary, and that worked out. So I went and started talking to some people about raising money for a company that would make athletic testing devices, because the stuff that was out there all felt like it was a beta version that they just started, like, they made something and within weeks started selling it and never really tested it or refined it. So it would break all the time and it was wonky or it was inaccurate, or it just like, is a 34-pound jump mat that breaks if you move it. So I was like, there's gotta be better ways to do this. Again, I like just tinkering with things. And so then that turned into OVR, and eventually I met my partner, Adam, and he's the engineer that sort of brings the literal devices to life. I just had like very specific things that I wanted from everything, and sort of like I had seen all the tech that was out there, and I saw like I would be, I went from training 8 kids the first day to 20 kids by the 4th day to by a couple months in, like at that first school, because this was before I was at Florida High. At Florida High, the most I've had in a day is 106. And at this other school, it was 93. And I'm the only strength coach. Like, 90 kids and me. Like, that's so the sort of like when I wanted to do stuff that was like, I do a lot of stuff with ground contact time, and I measure everything and we track everything. And so like the logistical needs were extreme, and the sort of pace of how everything needed to work. So it's like, there's a ton of cool toys that are on the market, but they cost too much. They take too long to use. They interrupt the flow of the workout. So yeah, I basically just bet like, well, if you could make things for a small enough amount of money that you don't jeopardize your marriage, if the cost of the items on the shelf is enough that people can afford to, to buy them, and like be able to tell their spouse like, oh yeah, you should see what I got today, and it doesn't precipitate a fight. If you could, if it's simple enough that one of your athletes can use it, because that's the only way that it becomes scalable, is your athletes have to be able to operate it. So yeah, that all turned into OVR, and basically I've tricked the world into making a company that services me as like the perfect customer. And so every day is just, I get to talk about the things that I obsess over to people who are also it pulls people in who are, I don't have like regular people who want to talk to me ever. It's other people who are into the thing that I want to talk about, seek me out on a daily basis. And my job is using the stuff that I wanted to buy that just didn't exist, or it didn't exist in a format that suited me.
Right.
So that's 8
Yeah.
answers in one.
Yeah, you pretty much answered all of it. I think another big piece that, for some of those newer coaches out there that are maybe interested in DBTs and jump mats is understanding what and why you're using this and how to use it properly. So could you explain to us why velocity-based training is good, and how you use it in your programming, and how other coaches can use it, to better their own, programming and what they're doing?
Yeah, the sort of the most simple way that I can put it is like velocity-based training helps you to ensure that you're actually doing the thing that you want to be doing. So, if you're trying to get strong, if you're trying to develop strength, you have to be forced to grind with enough time under tension and enough mechanical tension, which basically just means the bar needs to be forcibly slow enough that you actually are developing strength. So say, like, not to pick on anyone, but there's a lot of, like, say, high school gyms where they're doing power cleans, and no exercise is inherently good or inherently evil, just to start there, but every exercise has a purpose, right? And so there are a lot of people who do an exercise like a power clean and they push their kids to say go really heavy on it. Well, a clean, just because of the nature of the movement that the bar has to go from low to up high, it can't be done slow enough to create the amount of mechanical tension that's going to, say, make you stronger. So you can't do cleans to make you stronger. But you can, if you do your cleans light enough, you can move them fast enough that you improve your rate of force velocity. You move fast enough that it will transfer over to gains in quickness, speed, explosiveness, etc. But a lot of coaches, because they only know how to look at things through that weight on the bar as their primary or only means of progress, they'll say take an exercise like a power clean, and they end up basically prescribing it to where it's not actually serving any need. It's too fast to ever become a major mover for strength adaptations, but then they don't do it fast enough to build speed and explosiveness. Likewise, to get even more granular, a power clean typically has a very long period to get up into those higher velocities, right? So if you are, let's say, I was working last week with some coaches locally and a couple athletes who are Olympic jumpers, as in like they were in Paris competing for the US and some other countries. And we were doing some ground contact stuff for them. And I was basically illustrating how, the window of time in which you are pushing off the ground when you say take off from the board for the long jump, how that window of time is so short. So at certain points within your training, you're trying specifically to build up strength that is usable within a window that is short enough that that adaptation is going to carry over. Right? So a lot of this, it's easy to tell if you are just getting stronger. But then a lot of people experience disconnects within their training of they're getting stronger, but their jumps aren't progressing. Their speeds running aren't progressing. And so devices like the OVR jump or the OVR velocity just allow you to have added context. And then on top of that, again, I have that background in film. And this is where it becomes it becomes particularly valuable when talking about technology. So if I show you, we're watching a video right now. This video is not actually smooth motion. This video is still frames that are sampled, assuming that the Wi-Fi connection holds up, still frames that are sampled to show you, 30 stills in the period of a second. So you see 30 stills and it comes across to you as fluid motion, right? So now you start to think about athletic movements. If you take, your phone might show you 30 frames per second, or it might show you 60 frames per second. It might show you 24 frames per second. That's what a movie is typically played back at. But you can get down to, 20 frames, sometimes less per second, and your brain still registers it as smooth motion, right? So that means that kind of at a minimum threshold, your brain has problems distinguishing differences that are less than 0.05 seconds. So the difference between a 4.4 and a 4.45, or 5 and a 4.5, that could be the difference in a first or second rounder. That can be the difference in millions of dollars over the course of someone's career. That can be the difference of tens of millions of dollars over the course of someone's career if they fall from first round to second round because the incentive structures of their contract might mean that a team doesn't keep them. But so that's how big that fraction of a second is, and yet your human eye cannot actually observe that. So as a coach, you're watching your athletes say speed squat, right? Something pretty common. You're going to do, speed squats with or without bands. You're just doing like 5x5, and you're that old school coach who says, make it snappy, like, oh, I can see when it's good or not. Well, depending on the strength level of your athlete, they might get a better adaptation if the bar is slowed down just a hair, or if the bar is sped up a hair. And you can't tell unless it's slowed down significantly or sped up significantly, because simply the way that our eyes work, we don't process information fast enough. Moreover, what are you going to tell the athlete? That was a good rep or that was a bad rep? What if it's kind of in between? What if it's on this gray area where you're not really sure? You can't deliver, precise feedback. When you hook VBT up to it, you can tell them, hey, if you hit 0.6 meters per second for every rep this set, I want you to go as fast as you can. If you hit 0.6 meters per second for every rep, we're going to add 5 pounds to the next one. And they move it as fast as they can. And they hit, points. You can call out the velocity from the side. This is what I do with my kids. The side spotter will say, 6.1. And now they try and drive a little bit harder on that next rep. 6.3. And now they try and drive a little bit harder. 6.5. Okay, rack it. All right, we're going to put 5 more pounds on each side. And we're going to do that same thing for the next set. Now, this is beautiful because 5 pounds is so little weight, you could actually misload the bar by 5 pounds and not tell the kid. You probably can't feel the difference in 5 pounds. But so now the kid goes back, and again, that cutoff might be 0.6. You've upped the weight, so he should get slower, but you didn't up it by much. You upped it by so little that the kid can't definitively even tell that the bar is heavier. And now he moves at 0.64. 6.5, 6.7. He moves faster even though the weight went up. Because before he was going, I'll move fast. But he had, just like a video game, or if you keep score in any game, the focus becomes more intense. If the focus becomes more intense, the learning process associated with it becomes more intense. And now the kid, rep by rep, every time he hears that score, he's figuring out, because the way that human movement works is we don't actually replicate a firing pattern the same ever. We replicate like an approximation. So the electricity takes it might skip through one nerve and not another. It takes a slightly different approach every time. And when you get that feedback of oh, well, that was 0.03 faster. Now you've given a cue to your brain of that route was a little more efficient. And so now your brain, consciously or subconsciously starts to pattern those motor patterns just a little bit different towards something that's a little more efficient. It's like if you're watching Steph Curry shoot or you're listening to old stories of Larry Bird, Larry Bird, when he shot free throws, he'd get pissed off when he'd make a free throw. because it didn't spin through the net the right way. He wasn't just trying to make the free throw. He could miss in his mind and the ball still goes in the net, but he wanted it to roll just a certain way, make a certain sound. He wanted the net to splash a certain way. And when your goal becomes that precise, your failures become relative to the goal. So it's like if your goal is just move it fast, but you have no real way to quantify what fast is, then when you miss your goal, you might be missing by like 0.2 meters per second. You're able to see to the 100th of a meter per second. All of a sudden, when you miss, you're missing by 2 or 3 100ths, not a tenth. And that means that you get more reps that are in a more optimal zone for adaptation. So you get less junk reps out of your workout. Now you have to pay for every rep that you do, for every activity that you do. You have to pay for it in the form of fatigue. Whether it pushed you forward or not, you still have to pay for it. So it might limit you or it might weigh on you in the future and blunt or stunt your next workout. So if you have to risk every moment of tension, every calorie that you've expended, it's just like investing, like you wouldn't put $1 on everything if you knew that, like these bets over here are significantly more likely to hit. You would concentrate your money on the ones that were much more likely to hit, and you would take money away from the bets that were less likely to hit. If you start at that point, it's just economics and like simple behavior. If you start to like disassociate from a lot of the sort of ideas of tradition and ritual, and you start looking at like the whole reason why we formed these traditions within the weight room was initially to make us better at a specific thing. Like if you want to get bigger, like a bodybuilder, you do more work towards hypertrophy. If your sort of main goal is I want to get faster, well, then that's going to color the strength work that you do. You're not going to do all the hypertrophy stuff if your goal is get faster, because you don't want to carry that weight. You also want to make sure I'm developing like a crisper sort of, neural driver towards that speed. But so with all that said, like velocity-based training can be very overwhelming to people because it's a gateway to so many different questions and stuff. And you can tailor it to be so specific. But ultimately, what I tell people is when you're doing something to get stronger, click over to average velocity and make sure that you're getting reps that the fastest you can move the bar is still under 0.5 meters per second. Right? If you are working with young kids, you might give them a minimum bar threshold of, you don't count a rep unless it's over 0.5 meters per second until you trust them. And then after a few months, you go, okay, now I'll let you grind down to 0.4. So now we're actually going to do some things that might move the needle a little bit, but I'm also not going to let you grind so slow that you might miss. Now we're going to go down to 0.3 because I trust you a little more. It's been like 6 months. Now it's been a year or two, like you're one of the guys that I really trust. Now you're going to go down to 0.2. And now, you're basically like a little mini coach. I've been working with you for 3 years. You know the system. You know what's going to piss me off. And I'm going to tell you, like I don't want you missing anything, but you don't have a minimum threshold. So now you can go all the way as deep kind of in the bag of whatever strain you have, and you can go get the really valuable sub 0.2 meters per second, the real strain that's going to make your body go, holy crap, we got to make these motor units fire faster. We need bigger, more powerful motor units. And then on the other side, when you're trying to develop, power and speed, let's click it over to peak velocity and let's make sure that we're hitting whatever we're doing, that peak velocity is high enough. So if we're doing cleans, let's make sure that it's over 2.0 meters per second or over 2.5 meters per second, because we're doing these for power. It's in the name, so there's got to be some velocity. There's got to be some speed. So now, as a coach, you can make sure that all your kids are trying, because you can tell them, hey, what's the most, we're doing a max day, but it's no longer is it your 1 rep max on a power-based exercise. Now it's your 1 rep max. What's the most weight that you can lift over that 2.5 meters per second peak velocity? And so now you're training all your athletes to chase a more valuable version of that same exercise. It's like they're doing the same job you've had them doing, and they just got a raise. They're getting more out of the same system, the same amount of time. And, if you're like me, I deal with high school and, middle school athletes. They don't have frontal lobes. Like I tell them all the time, like, y'all are still in the oven. Y'all are just, squishy dough right now. There's not a biscuit in the bunch. So I've never said that before, but I'm from, there's two types of Floridians. There's beach Floridians and swamp Floridians, and I'm Tallahassee. I'm a swamp Floridian. There's no beach out here.
Tallahassee ain't nothing but the swamps, man. Ain't nothing
but swamps and pine trees. So,
Yeah, I'm from the beach side.
Yeah, so that folksy stuff will just, it'll pop out. But
yeah,
but ain't a biscuit in the bunch. I'm going to say that to some kids and confuse the hell out of them this afternoon. But the point being, like in your mid-20s, when you start to get that third-person perspective and you have full capacity of your frontal lobes, all of a sudden you understand things conceptually a lot better. But what's the problem? Your athletic career probably ended 5 years ago, and your body hurts all the time now and breaks easy. Meanwhile, when you were an athlete and you were young and pliable and adaptable, your brain doesn't work. So I can explain all this stuff step by step and logically, and most kids are going to tune out, or they're going to get confused. They're just going to smile and nod. Y'all got that? They'll do that thing where they start to make a sound, but they don't finish it positive or negative. They just kind of like let out a moan. They start like a head nod, but the head won't come down. It'll just, like, they could go either way, or uh-huh. Like, they just stare at you. So instead, I can say, we need to make this number go up. If this number is this big, I need you to add 5 more pounds. Move the bar as fast as you can upwards always. But now let's get it so that when you try your hardest, you're here. And now we're trying to move a bigger weight that's between here and here. And now we're trying to move a bigger weight that's north of here. So, and real quickly, they start to get it, and they start to realize, like, if you're having them move weights fast enough, you can't move real fast with bad technique. So like, it helps, not that it replaces a coach, but it helps to reinforce even when your head is, even when you're helping this kid on this side of the room, the kid on this side of the room has something helping to reinforce the concepts. And then over a long period of time, or not even that long really, but over a few weeks, they start to really understand the patterns, because every kid is used to playing games. Every kid is used to interacting with technology on their phone or on a console, or, like, this isn't new. I'm 38. This isn't new to me at this point. It might be new to my dad who's in his 60s, but it's, odds are if you were in your 50s, maybe even your 50s, then you grew up with like Atari, and you grew up with some manner of computers when you were relatively young. And, you probably, you've probably played video games, and you understand, as my score goes up, I'm getting better. So it also, it allows you to, whether it's the jump, if you're jumping and you're not able to measure the jumps, the kid's not going to give you good effort, right? The better the effort, the higher the speed and the higher the output. The higher the output, the stronger the adaptation. The better the effort, the stronger the adaptation. So you're doubling this, this stimulation effect to get stronger and stronger adaptations out of, again, you're getting paid more for the same amount of time. The same thing you've been doing. Now it's just every part of your workout now can be graded. And the kid, instead of hearing good, bad, instead of hearing good, they can hear better, 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 and they're building and so eventually what you used to tell them was good is no longer even acceptable. You're able to raise that standard because they're getting feedback. So it creates that ability to progress in very small increments. You might have plyo boxes, but what happens when your kid can get on the 42-inch plyo box, but he nicks his shin on the 44? Wouldn't it be great to have a 42.5-inch plyo box right there? Like, wouldn't it? Well, then, what happens when he gets stuck in between 42 and 42.5? Well, in the OVR jump, we can tell him 1/10 of an inch. 1/10 of an inch can be a PR. And you can start to measure things like loaded jumps and stuff, dumbbell jumps, trap bar jumps if you're so inclined. You can use it for ground contact time. Now, you work with a sprinter and they don't push off, like every young sprinter, they don't push off long enough on their first step. If you don't push off long enough on your first step, you know what happens to the angle of your torso? You go up. You know why it goes up? You know why kids, I say young kids, but I was also just working on this with, guys who are going to go first round in the NFL draft, in a couple weeks, and are going to run 4.2, 4.3 next week. When you project outwards, what makes people pop up is the fear that they're going to fall. If you thought you were going to fall, what would you do? You'd put your foot down, and you'd put it down too fast. Right? So you cycle into your next step before you maximize your last step. And that means that each step doesn't push you far enough out. So you're not covering enough ground. So you end up taking too many steps. All of these things that we try and solve through language and concepts. You tell a kid push harder. It doesn't work. You tell a kid step further. And he doesn't push himself to the next step. He just reaches. So now he's creating a braking force because he's overstriding. Meanwhile, you put some OVR jumps down and you just measure how long did that step take. And now you try and tell him, I want you to push a little bit longer. And you set up some timing gates and you watch as his time keeps going down the longer he pushes off that first step. Until eventually, theoretically, although I've never actually seen it happen, I watched a guy go from 0.2 all the way to 0.41 on his first step. He more than doubled the contact time. And yet his speed on the 10 yards after went up. His time got shorter even though he doubled the amount of time that he was on the ground. But it's because more time in contact with the ground means he could produce a greater percentage of his force. He could display a greater percentage of his strength. So a greater percentage of his strength means a greater percentage of force output relative to his own body weight. So even though he took longer on his first step, by his third step, he was taking less time because he had pushed his body so hard that his inertia, his mass, his momentum was built up. His velocity was getting so much faster by his third step because he spent longer pushing on the first one. But it was hard, like weeks of telling the kid, push out further, push out harder, wasn't getting that through. 5 runs with ground contact time, and he doubled that and ran his fastest time. Biscuit's still in the...
I love it, Coach, man. This simplifies a lot of things, and I wish I had more time to ask you even more things to go deeper dive into this, but I got to get back to work.
Yeah.
My day job. But Coach, I appreciate everything that you did for us today, everything you brought in, all the knowledge and everything, and also telling your story on where you started off to where you're at now. I can't wait to get OVR here at D1 in Murfreesboro to get our athletes working the correct way, also teaching them how to load and everything. So, Coach, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
No problem. And you're always welcome to, send me a text, message, whatever. We don't have to talk about OVR. You can just talk training. I don't care.
Yeah, we can talk some other stuff. Yeah.
That's what I love. Yeah.